rather. For those out there in the virtual land as well, I just want to say hello. Can everybody hear me okay? I'll do my best to project. Thank you for showing up, because I'm very encouraged by the turnout, both here and online, because it highlights, to me at least, and signifies an awakening to this most pressing issue, this most pressing threat that is facing our nation in our current moment, and also facing the Christian faith and life. I will just say at the outset that I'm not an expert in this. I am a concerned citizen. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, who I believe his message and image in way has been hijacked in a way that is not helpful, that is counterproductive, that is heretical, and that is truly threatening to, again, our democracy and to the livelihoods of those who we hold dear in our hearts, particularly the marginalized, LGBTQ individuals, migrants, people of color, and the like. I had the privilege a couple months ago of being on a panel with author and sociologist Sam Perry on this very topic. And the only reason I came to this topic was when I was in seminary several decades ago. I had always taken issue with the perversion of Christianity that began, as I would mark, and I think you would agree, Father Paul, is when Constantinian took hold of it and made it the national religion of Rome. And a following, which was called the Way, which was the way of the early Christians, which was all about following the way of Christ, caring for neighbor, loving oneself and as one's neighbor, and so on, was hijacked by the state. And we see, I think, the ramifications of that from the Crusades and throughout the Salem witch trials and so on to our present moment today. And I wanted to just be part of the clarion call. I want to be a prophet of sorts of this message that many of us, I think, within the church, particularly the Episcopal Church, as I've experienced, don't realize that this is a serious threat. So often when I bring up the topic, people treat it like it's hyperbole, but it is not. It is on the ballot in 2024. It is not only a threat to the democratic systems, but it is a threat to life. There will be blood, and there has been blood spilled over this issue. So it concerns me, again, as a citizen, as a follower of Christ, and then also as a Black man raising two sons in America today, because a lot of what's underpinning some of this, a good percentage of it, I would say, is white supremacy. And that is, so when you often hear the phrase Christian nationalism, you cannot separate it from the white supremacist movement that undergirds it. This is not to say that there are not Christian nationalists of other backgrounds, Black, Hispanic, and so on. But the predominant and most violent one that we've seen is the white supremacy. And so I gave a talk a while back here in my forum to members of the congregation, and I'm happy to share that with you. If you sat through it before, here you are again. So there'll be time for questions and answers as we go along. So without further ado, I'll share the screen. Chip. You're going to
Yeah.
All right, great. So is this playing? Oh, this next. Okay, great. Which one? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Round of applause for Chip, ladies and gentlemen, our tech guy today. All right, so we have to, in order to fully address the issue, we need to understand the issue. And certainly for those who care about our nation, for those of us who are followers of Christ, who care about the church and its message, the message of Christ being hijacked, we need to confront it because it is, I think, our moment to enter into the breach and awaken others to its existence and be a bulwark against its advances in our nation. I forgot some paperwork that I'm going to need. Excuse me a second.
Oh, okay, thanks.
I have my walking. And yeah. All right, I'll get it later. I have something a handout I want to share with you at the end. On my desk, the table behind my desk, there is a stack of papers, Project 25. Can you bring that down, please? Thank you. Feels breaker, one-niner. Oops, and now we got someone else on here. All right. And so, excuse me for the interruption. So we have to understand it. How many of you, by show of hands, have heard of it? Certainly. How many of you have heard it most recently? Okay. And so so how many of you know it existed for a long period of time? Okay, great. All right, so that's good news. So I'm talking to the choir here. So I'm glad that you have awakened, but let me just go back real quick. So as you can see, this is kind of some of the imagery that we associate with the Christian nationalist movement. And we saw it on full display in vivid color HD on January 6th. Some of the imagery you see here is from that January 6th. We have the insurrection on the Capitol, some of the t-shirts here, One Nation Under God, the shaman here who prayed on the floor of the Senate. In Jesus's name, we've seen the cross imposed upon the American flag. And then I've seen images of Jesus brandishing an AR-15 as the warrior Christ. And then, of course, we know back in the 1950s, when In God We Trust was printed on our currency as a bulwark against communism. So Christian nationalism, thank you. That was that. So Christian nationalism has been with us for quite some time, but here's what it is. And I use one of the hymns. And so if we think that it's just relegated to evangelicals and the like, we folks, those of us who are in the Episcopal Church as well, we have a little bit of our footprint in that space as well. And you'll hear it in hymns such as Onward Christian Soldiers, marching as to war with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ, the royal master, leads against the foe. Forward into battle, see the banners go. Once I was aware of that, I eliminated that from my churches that I served as far as the music we would sing. But Christian nationalism, I'm just going to read this and please bear with me, is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. Popularly, Christian nationalists assert that America is and must remain a Christian nation, not merely as an observation about American history, but as a prescriptive program for what America must continue to be in the future. Scholars like Samuel Huntington have made a similar argument that America is defined by its Anglo-Protestant past and that we will lose our identity and our freedom if we do not preserve our cultural inheritance. And that is the mythos that we were founded as a Christian nation. That many of those who ascribe to Christian nationalism believe this, and they're trying to, as we know, bring that back into the forefront. We've seen that throughout in areas about 10 Commandments on state houses and bringing prayer back in schools and so forth. Christian nationalism holds the ideological belief that America was founded again as a Christian nation. It is the New Jerusalem, that shining city on a hill, God's promised land. And that Americans, mostly white, are God's chosen elect. It's the manifest destiny. It believes that our ills and isms are due to the fact that we have strayed from God's laws, God's 10 commandments. It believes that we have polluted the waters by immigration and bringing in others, particularly Muslims and other faith traditions into America. And so they believe that they are God's tools, God's instruments for justice and judgment. They are the elect, and they'll use any means necessary to restore America to God's land, including violence, not only as we saw on January 6th, but also we saw decades before Timothy McVeigh in the bombing of Oklahoma City. And it doesn't believe in separation of church and state, and that believes that the church should govern the state. And that's what it is at its heart and at its root. What really gets me concerned is, again, that desire to utilize violence as a tool to achieve the means. Because as we know, if you say that God is on your side, you can justify anything. This is what happened through the Crusades, as we know. This is what happened through the Salem Witch Trials and so on. This is what happened during chattel slavery here in America. Slave owners justified slavery through cherry-picking passages of the Bible to justify the enslavement of those in their charge, or not charge, those in captive. And I've often said one of the mistakes that the slave owners made was giving the slaves the unadulterated Bible. And so slaves obey your masters became Moses freeing the slaves from Egypt to the land of promise. That was the mistake they made. And so this goes back in our history. It is deeply rooted and ingrained in the DNA of our nation. And again, it is happening right now. All right, so let's make sure I got everything. So I talked a little bit about some of the origins. Whoops, I want to jumping ahead. So the origins, again, we go with Constantine, we go to the Crusades, we have the Pope. Don't ask me to remember his title. I'm blanking on his title. And we have, of course, Christopher Columbus, who basically said, God is with us, therefore go conquer the lands of those savages, convert them by any means necessary, kill them, it's all good. That is where it has its roots. And again, if you say that God is with you, you can do anything, apparently, as far as violence and destruction. And then again, we see the modern interpretations of that in our time. Again, Oklahoma City bombing, the Capitol riots, the Ku Klux Klan, and the like. And so we see some of the imagery of the Capitol, of the insurrection: vote the Bible, take a stand for morality, in God we trust, stop the steal, erecting the cross on the Capitol lawn. And this, by the way, was erected side by side swastikas, Dixie flags, and gallows. So it shows you where the mindset is around this issue. And again, we have to take it seriously because it is a threat to all that we hold dear. Some of the champions of the Christian movement are the following individuals. Some of you may recognize some of these folk, right? So Michael Flynn is leading a new crusade, and he's using violent rhetoric. And we have two prominent pastors also who are leading the charge. We all know this guy. Hurricanes and stuff are sent by God to judge the other. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a proud Christian nationalist. And then, of course, Lauren Boebert. But those who make up the Christian nationalist movement are the following. There are those who are, this is according to the Washington Post, God and country conservatives. They are our family and our friends. They're our neighbors who hold a dear vision of a country rooted in nostalgia, a time perhaps in the 50s when everybody kind of knew their place, where men, predominantly white men, dominated the landscape. Women knew their place in the kitchen, blacks knew their place in the back of the bus, and so on. And 45% of Americans believe in that kind of nostalgic desire to go back to that time where everybody knew their place and where prayer was in school, and they wanted to kind of root that in God. 52% of those from a Pew report said that the federal government should never name religion as the country's official faith, but 24% of Americans said it should. And so we're seeing almost like a closing of that gap where now we have 48% of our nation voting for Christian nationalism and the other not. The other groups that make up the Christian nationalist movement are the religious right old guard, such as our friend Pat Robertson there. Tony Perkins, anyone heard of Tony? At the Family Research Council. Albert Mohler, who's the president of the Southern Baptist Theology Seminary, and Texas activist David Barton. It's also made up of MAGA and QAnon followers. Again, Michael Flynn is an advocate for and a champion for the QAnon MAGA movement. He's doing that Reawakening America tour. And he's the one also, again, calling for violence. And he sees that what this is as in this time that we're in the midst of a holy war. And then the Sean Fook, who is a worship leader as well. He's the one, for those who don't know, who believe that COVID-19 was an intentional design to stop churches from gathering and use that as a platform to bolster people's belief that the church is under assault and so on. And that the QAnon movement is that we are run by satanic cabal of pedophiles, mostly Democrats. That's who he is. And then another group making up the nationalist movement is the online extremists. Those who are such an example, Andrew Torba is an alternative social media website, called Gab. He is a big proponent of the America First movement that's happening on the dark web and also in the broad daylight in the mainstream web. They've hosted folks like Nick Fuentes from the Proud Boys and the like. And then another group making up that are the Trump prophets. They are the ones who are self-proclaimed prophets that believe that Trump has been ordained by God himself, and that he is the man who can have no fault. He has been compared to some, to King David, flawed, but yet God, and Trump can do no wrong, right? Sammy Daniels, E. Jean Carroll, be damned. Trump can do no wrong. He can go out on Fifth Avenue, as he said, shoot somebody and still gain votes. And so they are the believers of the Trump prophets that the 2020 election results should be overturned and by prayer, and that spiritual warfare must be the tool that's being used. And Michelle Bachmann is one of those individuals. Some of you may know her as well. And the last group making up that are the Patriots and Theocrats, and those would be the Proud Boys and the Patriotic Front that's based in Idaho. And they are the brown shirts who go out and will start the fights with Antifa and so forth and so on. They're the ones who show up at drag shows or in readings in their tan khaki pants, shirts and masks and hats. And so those are the folks who kind of make up this movement, and they're all working in concert with one another. And the most frightening thing is that they're well-resourced and well-financed and well-organized. And for me, that's most daunting as an Episcopalian, because we are God's frozen chosen. We are the most introverted of denominations, I was told by a Baptist counterpart. And the question and challenge for me is, how do we confront something so well organized, something that's growing, when we're all kind of too afraid to even say hello to each other in the elevator? And I say that because I've gone to a lot of church conferences, Episcopal conferences, and I've often said to the groups as in sessions that we all lament decline and irrelevancy and all these things, but I'm like, guys, if we can't say hello to each other with our name badges in our safe spaces, in the familiar space, how are we going to go out and counter Christian nationalism? How are we going to share the good news of God in Christ if we can't even speak to each other? So this time that we find ourselves in requires all of us to step up. Be we churched or otherwise. We have to be a counter force against this extremist. And by that, I don't mean we need to take up arms, because what's happening currently, if you have been tracking, so we know that these groups are well armed, and they've shown up to events with their AR-15s across their chests and the like. So they've shown up with riot shields and makeshift spears. And I don't know if you ever saw some of the clashes. I think it was back in 2020 between varying groups, and it was kind of like watching an episode of Braveheart. These clashing clans with weaponry and such. And there, as a counter, there are families, LGBTQ families and the like, who are arming themselves, getting gun training. I don't think that's the answer to this issue, but this is, again, kind of where we find ourselves with this rising temperatures around this issue. But here's some of the language that you may have heard around. Maybe I'll say, guess who this is. All right, we'll play that game. All right, the church is supposed to be directed by the government, and I'm tired of all this separation of church and state junk. That's not in the Constitution. Who said that? No. Laura, I'm sorry, not Laura. That was Lauren Boebert who said that. If we're going to have one nation under God, which we must have one religion. Who said that? Jesus. No, Michael Flynn said that. The founding document of the United States of America acknowledged the lordship of Jesus Christ because we are a Christian nation. That was the Pastor Jeffries, who you saw in the image earlier in the middle. Thanksgiving is for real Americans, not Indians. We founded this Christian nation. Why, if it wasn't for God-fearing pilgrims, the natives would still be running around in loincloths shooting at things with their arrows? Who said that? We haven't seen her in a while, but we all know who she is. Take a guess. John McCain. No. Who? John McCain. I'm leading you to it. Sarah Palin. That was Sarah Palin. Yeah. So this is what's in people's hearts. This is what's driving, and this is why we cannot just look at it solely from a political lens. This is, and there's an author of a book called Christians Against Christianity. I heard him speak at Redeemer Church a while ago. I don't remember his name offhand, but he said we have to see this through a spiritual lens, because this is a spiritual and moral issue that we are confronting. We are confronting evil, and these were his words. And it's hard not to see it through that lens. The caution in that is not to fall prey to the vilification of and creating demons out of our opponents, which they see us as. Michael Flynn has used language, and other pastors have used language of the demonic. One pastor, I don't remember his name. He was on. A lot of the stuff I hear through some of these podcasts. He was on, telling Democrats to get out of his church. Get out of his church, you demons. We don't want you, And so that's how and once you use that language, once you create a distant other from someone, once you call Native Americans savages, once you call Black slaves savages, you can do anything to them because they're not human. That's why they're using this language of spiritual warfare. We're right, they're evil, right? We saw what happened in the pizza scandal with Hillary Clinton, because that language around dehumanization and creating demons out of our opponents. So we have to see it through the lens of good and evil, but we cannot fall prey to the same tactics to counter it. As Jesus said, for those of us who are in church life, we know Jesus said, render no one evil for evil, as hard as that is sometimes. And then our goal must be simple. We must have a nation built on God's law, on the 10 Commandments, no apologies. I don't know who said that, but we know that there are many state capitals that have had that fight. And those of us who've driven down 71 towards Columbus, we get the 10 Commandments every time, as if they're going to change something. It's kind of weird.
Well, it's big, better Jesus.
Oh, yes, that. And here's what we must counter Christianity with. Yeah. Whoops.
Yeah. Now he's like, tall.
Yeah. And here's how we must counter Christianity. Thomas Jefferson said, no man shall be compelled to frequent or support religious worship or ministry, or shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in the matters of religion. Then Jesus, of course, said, when he was asked, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your mind, with all your strength. You should love, and the second is like this, you love your neighbor as yourself. On these two laws hang all the law and the prophets. And so I highlighted both a secular and a religious quote to make the point that we have to have a bifurcated approach to this. We have to have, as citizens of this nation, we were not founded as a Christian nation. We're founded where everyone can practice their religion. We're all men, quote unquote, are created equal. And we cannot allow that reality to be twisted any longer. And then for us who are Christians, our challenge is to confront this bastardization, this heresy rather, of our faith, of our Lord. Putting a AR-15 in the hands of the Prince of Peace is truly offensive, to say the least. It's demonic, in my opinion. And I feel compelled on both fronts to respond. And it's not solely about voting. We can all do that. It really is about showing up and being a presence and a counterforce in these places where we can, as we're willing. It's going to require all of us to step out of comfort zones and to risk. And as the church, to step into the breach, find our voice and counter this narrative. And I am comforted that there is an awakening happening within the Episcopal Church and other denominations. Jim Wallace from Sojourners, our presiding Bishop Michael Curry, and others are awakening to counter this evil that is in our midst. But again, make no mistake, this election is not like any election of our time. This is Christian nationalism on the ballot. And it's not all just about Trump. Trump is the useful idiot, as I'm sure glad, and I don't know where you stand, so I don't want to offend sensibilities, but so I'm not trying to tell you who to vote for, but Trump is the poster boy. He is the white knight for this movement. Some of you may have seen pastors gathering around anointing him and praying for him, making all sorts of excuses for him to justify not him, but to justify the movement that he will champion. So, for example, if Trump wins, he, as we know, he has no depth or substance. This is why, as a New Yorker, having known him as the grifter he was from Queens, I'm like, why is this man the president? But now he, as we saw when he brought up the Bible, and it is a myth, by the way, it wasn't upside down, it's actually right side up. But when he brought out the Bible, he's playing upon, and that's what he does. He plays us against each other. So they're going to use him. And when he gets, if and when, let's just say he gets into office, because it's kind of, if we believe the polls, it's getting kind of hairy. They're going to implement what's something called Project 2025. Everyone heard what that is? I have handouts for you to see, kind of break down what Project 2025 is. He passes that. I've heard about it, but yeah. Basically, in short, it is a Christian nationalist manifesto. It is our equivalency of Nazism in America. It's fascistic, and it is what they want to implement, and Trump will be their champion. And I'm just going to break up. Once you get this in hand, we will look over this together and just go over these things. And for those who are online, I apologize, I don't have this for you, but we can have Bill and or Ed get that to you as we go forward. So basically, should Trump get in, I'm giving you one-page overview. It's a 929-page document of manifesto where conservatives will take control of the executive and congressional branches of government. And I'll just read the first, for those online, I'll just read some of it for you. The first paragraph of the closing summary of Project 25 Mandate for Leadership. Quote, ultimately, the left does not believe that all men are created equal. They think they are special. They certainly do not think all people have an unalienable right to pursue the good life. They think only themselves have such a right, along with a moral responsibility to make decisions for everyone else. They don't think any citizen, state, business, church, or charity should be allowed any freedom until they first bend the knee. This book, this agenda, the entire Project 2025, is a plan to unite the conservative movement, the American people, against elite rule and woke cultural warriors. What they're not saying in that paragraph, if we have to read it between lines, and what you don't hear in this or see in that is the white supremacist undergirding. Trust me, this is not for migrants, immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ folk, liberals, certainly they make that clear. So this is definitely for a certain ilk of individual. They have an advisory board, which would include 100+ conservative organizations who are funding and promoting their agenda. Again, they are well funded. Second, the next one is that it rests on 4 pillars of promise, of mandate for leadership. It's called the Conservative Promise. It's a 17-page forward filled with aggressive, inflammatory, adversarial language that fuels the holy warrior mentality of this movement. Quick summary of the 4 pillars are the following. Pillar 1 is a promise to restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Anti-LGBTQ, anti-reproductive rights, anti-women's rights, anti-public education, anti-social media, anti-hyphenated Americans, pro-Christian patriarchy. The next pillar, promise 2, is to dismantle the administrative state and return self-governance to the American people. Anti-government agencies, specifically departments of education, interior, homeland security, immigration, the EPA, the FTC, Office of Pandemic Preparedness, anti-legislative processes, pro-executive authority. 4, defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. Anti-educated elites, anti-woke left, anti-immigrant, anti-United Nations, anti-NATO, anti-globalization, anti-open borders, anti-international agreements, anti-China, pro-American capitalism. And the fourth, secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty, anti-legal constraints, anti-regulation, anti-progressivism, anti-secularism, pro-individual rights, meaning bring back Jim Crow. That's my read of that. And so that's what they want to do in November. And if we stay home, they're going to do it. And so all the stuff we're hearing in the news, again, it's not hyperbole. This is what's happening. And again, to use the phrase of Malcolm X, they're going to do it by any means necessary. And they have done it, and they're going to use violence. I was listening to a podcast, and the author was featured. It's called Straight White American Jesus. It's a great podcast. I recommend it, by Brad Onishi, is the one of the founders of that. And he had an author who wrote a book called The Age of Insurrection. And he was saying that summer 2025 is going to be the flashpoint. If Trump loses, he said, his followers are going to go crazy. And we're going to see the violence. He said we're going to see mini insurrections, which means state capitals, school boards, things of that nature. He said we're going to see more Timothy McVeigh-like events and things of that nature. As I said, when I was on the panel in Houston, there will be blood this coming summer, 2025. Kind of go on vacation now if you can. And then he also said, if he wins, you're going to have sanctioned terrorism. And Trump has told us what they want to do. They're telling us what they want. They're not hiding this. It's here. And so we can't say, we didn't know about this. No one told me. It's all up front for us. And so the sanctioned terrorism is, as they said, they want to lock up migrants in camps. They want to, send people. They want to have this great expulsion of immigrants. They want to take away women's rights, reproductive rights. They want to take away the rights of minorities and so on that we fought for. And they want to undo the civil rights movement and bring us back to the 50s, some maybe even the 1850s. And so that is kind of what we are up against. Well, it's not kind of, that's what we're up against. Am I having a...
No, she wasn't sure if you were close to the end of the presentation. You're going back on video.
Oh, not yet. Yeah, I have one more thing I'll share before I... Yeah, so I cannot stress the urgency of our time. And I will be honest with you, as a man of faith, I'm scared to death. Not only, and I feel more so, although this is everywhere, because when I was in New York, that blue bastion that in that bubble that I lived in, Trump supporters shut down the bridge. Trump supporters came through in a pickup truck and chased my kid in my little village in Nyack. So this stuff is happening. And if he wins, the people have license to behave this way and cover. I'll pay your, what do you say? I'll pay your bail and so forth. And then again, if he doesn't, it's going to be, and they have talked about, we've heard calls for civil war. When I attended a clergy gathering of deans in the Washington Cathedral, John Meacham, the presidential historian, was the guest speaker, along with Sam Perry and another individual from Christian Nationalist movement. And I said, Mr. Meacham, are we headed towards a civil war? And he said, well, we're not looking at gray versus blue, but certainly we're looking at an age of unrest and conflict. The problem is, we know historically, while we're kind of at this point, is because the Civil War was never finished. We're still fighting it today. And I think we're at that culminating point. And the question for us is, who are we going to be and who do we want to be going forward? That's what's on the ballot again in November. Who are we going to be? Are we going to be an American democracy, or are we going to be a tyranny, a white supremacist, Christian nationalist tyranny? The temptation might be for some of us to say, you know what, America, good luck, I'm out. I have friends who've actually moved, some to Ghana, some friends are moving to south of France. I wish I had their money. But some of us are going to have to stay here and confront this. I vowed to confront this. I am going to get, and I'll be honest with you, I'm looking at getting dual citizenship for my sons for Finland. My wife's mother's from Finland. And should the stuff hit the fan, I might have to send them away for a while till we get this stuff right. But that's where we are. And I wish I could put a rosy stamp on that and say, Jesus loves us, it's all going to be okay. But remember what happened to Jesus. Take away all the, doctrinal, dogmatic, magical things. We killed the Prince of Peace. People use violence when they're afraid. And what really is undergirding all of this is fear. And not only that, what exacerbates that fear is the cult-like mindset. One of the things that came up in an Atlantic article not long ago. I'm getting to the end with the slides. Can the people see me or just hearing me?
They're hearing you and seeing the slides.
Oh, okay. So
You're going to turn.
before I get into my preaching moment, I'll just say, here's some books that I recommend for you to check out. And there's plenty more. Once you go on Amazon, you'll hit the rabbit hole of books. But these are the ones that have caught my eye and that I've used. The one that I Flag and the Cross by Sam Perry is really great, as well as The Founding Myth. There's another one called Jesus and John Wayne that kind of talks about how we got this hyper masculinity thing going. And then most recently from Bradley Onishi is Preparing for War, because that is what they're doing, preparing for war. And we can switch. Second.
We'll stop and then you'll be on video.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody see me? All right. So, and so, yes, I wish I could put a rainbow on this topic. This is not to say there's not hope. I want to be clear, but where's the hope? Where's the hope? This is not going to fix itself unless we get engaged in this. And the call isn't to pick up arms, as I said, but it's going to require presence. It's going to require us getting engaged in the processes. It's going to involve us getting to the point where we are there, standing for our neighbors, particularly those who will be targeted and marginalized and so on. But now is the time we need to rise to the occasion and address this most pressing issue. And so that's kind of what I've been involved in and what I've been doing and championing, educating people around as best as I can, educating myself around, and trying to figure out the best way to prepare for. One of the things that we are, as the cathedral here, is we are an affirming church. We will let our folks know, no matter what happens, we're going to welcome you into a space that's going to be, hopefully, be a sanctuary for God's people. I know back in the 90s when we had our diocese under my father's leadership confronted the Ku Klux Klan. Some of you remember the Ku Klux Klan used to show up on the square. Do y'all remember that? It was kind of comical if you think about it, because the Klan would come down with their thing, then the Satanists came down with their thing, and it just got, it was silly. But after the race riots here, a rifle bullet was left on the stoop of our cathedral as a warning to us. And thanks be to God, we have not shirked away from our duties and our responsibility to stand at the forefront of these issues. I'm having conversation with our bishop, how do we prepare ourselves for the possibility? We've had, I forgot the name of the group, Westboro Baptist Church out here boycotting us. We're doing an active shooter drill here in the church as well, because it's just the nature of where we are and the times which we find ourselves. And so one of the ways that we need to deal with this is to care for one another, provide for one another, support one another, and yeah, vote. Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. And if you have any neighbors, kids who are cynical, and they're worrying about inflation will adjust itself eventually. That's not the issue. And what gets me, where I see a lot of African Americans who are kind of leaning towards Trump because of inflation or otherwise, I'm like, you don't seem to realize what's at stake here. And so and then again, for me, when I moved here, I remember going down 71 during my college years up to Columbus. And some of you may remember that KKK station on the side of the road there with the big Dixie flag and the cross and the car from the 50s. It was always a reminder of where I lived. And that hasn't, the barn's gone away, but it's the mentality is not. And there's an awakening of that evil in our midst. And this is why I also want to just say lastly, and then we'll answer questions. It is a spiritual issue. It is a spiritual moral issue. Your vote is spiritual and it is moral. But I will also say that you exist in this moment for a reason. And the reason that we exist is to be love embodied, to counter this stuff. And I hope that this will be, in some ways, and why it's so, I think why there's so much energy around it, is I feel like it is the last bastion, the last gasp of, it is the last bastion, and it is the last gasp of white supremacy and systemic racism. It'll certainly exist, but I think this is why there's so much hanging on Trump's election for folks. And my hope is that, like a demonic force, that if we respond in this time, we can exorcise it from the body politic and hopefully not have to do this again. The fact that we're having to repeat this nightmare is kind of where we're at. And it says a lot about who we are. So I'm going to open up for questions. Yeah, and I'm not.
Not so much a question as a
Go ahead.
action individually.
Yeah.
If a lot of people, they don't feel up to the fight, because like me, I'm pretty physically, I don't get hurt in any way, shape, or form, but I did run across several articles, podcasts, and tests. That if you don't feel like going to barricades and hitting the streets, you can support your local library. Make sure that if someone's going after the library system, try to give them books that might be better. Give them support. I don't know who, I honestly don't know if there's someone that's elected to oversee the libraries, but they could use, support them with the vote. You can also take out subscription to the newspaper you require. Support the news outlets that you trust. Subscribe to online to various newspapers. Make sure that they are funded to support them.
Yeah.
In order to get the truth out.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, I get that.
Mm-hmm. But
remember one thing, that even if Trump disappeared tomorrow, either he dies or goes off to Europe or whatever. Trumpism is all just the crowd voices. Not we're going to create stuff with this political, movement for years, if not decades to come. So we don't have a choice to sit on the sidelines.
Right, thank you. And one example,
Suggestion.
Yeah.
People online, so if you have a long speech, come up to.
okay,
And if you could just, you can hear most of it, but if you could repeat. The
Sure,
question,
okay.
some-
Sorry, online. So one of the things that if you want to know what Christian nationalism looks like as far as the how it would be if it was made manifest in its fullest iteration, look to Florida. That's an example. And the reason why there's the book banning and all that and the education system attack, if you want to maintain a system that benefits a certain group, you're going to need recruits, right? So why then you want to uneducate these folks? So you want to ban books about slavery and other things that would open people's eyes to the reality of God's splendor, of God's diversity in the world. And so this is why there's an intentional movement to undermine education in particular. It's all insidious and systemic. And so that's an example. And you can also look to, I think it's Iowa, where they have this most strict abortion laws and doctors are fleeing in droves to the point where they've had to close a hospital, OBGYN clinic as well. And so we're seeing what it looks like. And then the good news is in Iowa is that some of the most extremist MAGA Republicans, if you will, are recognizing that they've gone too far. But that's an example of that's what Project 2025 looks like in part. Those are the canaries in the mine. And so I'm glad that we can see it, not as something in the abstract, but we can actually see it concrete at work. Yes, sir. We have a question, so I'm going to repeat it as I get it.
Just a comment.
Comment. Yeah,
It's a large problem.
it's a large problem.
You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier about how resourced these groups are.
Yeah.
Are there places out there, I believe that, money talks.
Yeah.
So that's all something we all can do starting immediately.
Right.
Is find out where these resources are coming from,
Mhm.
stop spending their money, stop buying their products, stop,
Yeah.
stop that. So where can we find that information?
Yeah. So, the question was about how, with a movement so well resourced, how do we counter? Do we find ways to boycott? Can you use that, boycott? Spending money in those places and the like. A lot of the money is dark money, and so it's hard to trace. Some of it's out in the open, from the billionaire class on certain, conservatives. So I would say the way to counter that is and it's almost ridiculous in the way it goes, but for the liberal or progressive billionaire class to counter and resource. So I don't know of any business or any organization that we can target specifically, but certainly it's going to take time to identify as we go. I know we're doing that right now with the ongoing situation in Ukraine and Gaza. We're looking at our stock portfolio as a church, and are we contributing to militarism, climate change, and like. So I think we do need to do that research. So to that point, I think what we can do is we need to delve deeper into how all this stuff is interconnected, and then discover ways of which we can counter, and then kind of like an underground network, say, hey, here's, like I know, for example, again, I'm not trying to choose political sides, but I personally, this is just me, I don't go to Home Depot because I know who the Home Depot owner supports. So I go to Lowe's, and I don't know who he or she supports, but for me, because once you see the light like Plato, you don't go back in the cave, right? So I think it's kind of awakening to some of that stuff. And I hate that we have to do that, but that's kind of, again, where we are as far as the conflicting parties or in this nation. What I also think we need to do is, and I just pray that we would have, and I know Prince could speak to this, I just wish we could have an awakening as a people and to see how we're all being played against each other, how poor whites are being played against poor blacks. It's always, and this goes back to the time of post-Reconstruction, where poor whites and poor blacks said, wait a minute, we're all being treated like crap, and they came together, and then that was shut down. I wish that these folks showing with AR-15s and those voting for, certain politicians recognize they don't have their best interests at heart. They're not going to benefit financially, at least, but they're going to feel empowered the ways that they felt like power has been taken away from them. But the tragedy is, and I've said this, and I'll take a little survey as an example. You can raise your hands online as well. How many of you want to go out into a hot field on a 90-degree day and pick strawberries or lettuce? Mm-hmm. So immigrants are nobody, right? Immigrants are not taking anyone's jobs per se, right? But we're being led to believe that this immigrant horde is coming in, so they're being vilified. What's raising prices are not immigrants coming in; it's some of the major corporations. And I'm not trying to vilify Wall Street and all those things. I'm just saying that's just the system. But the system's been used as part of this as a tool to manipulate. And so the hope is, to your point, is to find people of good conscience on Wall Street and other places to say, wait a minute, this is not right, and to step up in this moment as well. Another question. Yeah, I want to give you longer than just a question, so give me a sec. So one of the things I wanted to say, and I'm hoping my 53-year-old brain will bring it back to you.
Well, while you're.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that the book, Rachel Bau's book, has been very interesting to me, because she basically, and it's a point that I agree with, that the problems that we have today are really virtually the same problems that we've had before. they resurface, they come up to a point, it gets some attention, they basically overplay their hand, they fall back down. So in essence, the things that we face now are things that were faced right, believe it or not, right before and after World War II. And so I guess part of my question is, what can we do on a long term to face this, not just the moment when we're playing whack-a-mole. But in a long term.
So Father Paul asked a question. He said that we have been through all this type of thing before. History does indeed repeat itself in many ways. But Paul's question was, how can we look toward the long-term solutions rather than just the short-term issues? It is a hamster wheel. And I do think God's kind of like, I wish they'd just figure it out. Stop the ride, I want to get off. And my thing is, because again, what's driving a lot of this is the reptilian brain, fear, as I said before. And so I think what we need to do, as far both long-term and short, is we have to learn from history. We've seen this play out in Europe, right, under Hitler. Why are we doing the same thing again? Because I think because we believed ourselves in the great myth of American exceptionalism, we thought it can never happen here. But we've got an entire MAGA movement going to Hungary to learn about how to be dictators in America. Setback was held in Hungary. And so, and the reality is too, I think what some of these folks count on is our uneducated. We're not a well-educated nation comparatively. Those who've traveled know, comparatively, we have a pretty dumbed down populace, and that's intentional. My brother's a naval intelligence officer. And he will tell you, and we're not naming it, and I'm sure, Ed, you can attest, we are currently in a cyber war with Russia and China. We've not named it as such, but we are. Part of who's fomenting this violence and this division and polarization are the Russians. They recognize that we have a racial issue and all these things, and they're pushing buttons, sending algorithms. So for example, let's just say I'm a gun-loving hunter who likes pheasants, and I like to go out with my shotgun and like Elmer Fudd and go out there. If I go on Facebook or some type of social media network, the algorithms that are designed, they'll start feeding me stuff. So my shotgun becomes an AR-15. My AR-15 becomes a militia group. My militia group becomes storming the Capitol, and that's intentional. So to your point, I think we need to start separate ourselves from the social media apparatus, which in and of itself is evil. And we need to recognize how we're being played that way mentally as well. And so, yes, be advised, a lot of the polarization that's being fueled is Russia and China at work. And then if you look at some of the MAGA Republicans, they're championing Russia. And why are they championing Russia? Because for them, Russia represents the last pure white nation on the planet. And they have a dictator who locks up homosexuals and so on and kills his opponents. Our president, our potential president, former, is talking about assassination of opponents. So this is all coming together. And I know it's big, to your point. It's huge. And we want to turtle up, but we can't. And as you were saying, I'm 53-year-old. I'm not, I got a bum hand. I'm not going out there fighting in the streets. But the mindset in Buffalo, people like us went to a grocery store and got shot. So we can't escape it. It's there. And what frightens me again is we have a nation that's inundated with guns. I forgot the ratio to guns to civilians. And then you put a gun in people's hands, and you put this mindset in their hands. You create laws where you say no one needs to conceal carry, no training. And then you let people loose in the streets. It's not a recipe for success. Now, before I know we're running up, I have an appointment coming up, but I want to introduce you. I said I was not an expert. I want to introduce you to Chrissy, who was here on Sunday. Can I share a little of your story? Chrissy was a survivor of a Christian nationalist cult. She lived it, and she wants to share a little bit of her experience and may answer some questions for you. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thanks for coming. So no, come on up, Cindy. I want you to introduce so people can see you on the screen. just by happenstance, I met Cindy at 8 o'clock service on Sunday, Chrissy, and she shared her story with me. So come on in and please feel free to ask questions.
Hi.
She's lived it.
So I grew up with some wackadoodles, I'll just be honest with you. I was born into basically a very poor, very abusive household. When I was, getting a little older, I basically went into the foster system. My birth mother and all that, there was a lot of issues. The foster care system that I ended up in was a fundamentalist family that, in all honesty, the Southern Baptists were too liberal for these folk. Okay. We went to a Southern Baptist church in a rinky-dinky town that basically had a parade, not even kidding, when they got a stoplight. Okay. That's how tiny this place was back in the 90s. And there was some division that went on in the church. A lot of the adults had gone to a conference down in Texas by a man called Bill Gothard. And I don't know if you ever heard of him, but I can guarantee you this man is messed up. He's all about prosperity gospel and living under the umbrella of authority. And when that happened, my life and the life of my siblings changed immensely. It became instant obedience without any question. And basically, you have your children, the mother, and then the father. So the father is the head of the household as Christ is the head of the church. And when I talk about cherry picking Bible verses, these people can cherry pick some Bible verses now. And they even have their own militia. They call it the Alert Academy, where young men are sent off to literally learn military style skill. And they're taught that they're sovereign citizens. I still have people that I dearly love who are in this, and I mean all the way in it, really bad, to where I've had to put up a no contact boundary just for my own sanity. Because a person who has known me since I was 10 years old told me that if I had straightened out my life, I wouldn't have cancer. And the thing is, she truly believes that. She actually believes that God has a cosmic fly swatter ready to just knock the snot out of her every time she does something wrong. She believes she is so awful that she cannot be loved by her own God. And of course, that's going to transfer to everybody else. And so everybody is sin. So you start to isolate. And then, because the schools are way too liberal, even the very, very, very conservative Christian school that I went to, which did not take state funding, so it wasn't an accredited school, which meant you had to go get your GED.